Because, let's be honest, some stains never wash out. A laundry woman will always be a laundry woman.
That's what Vivian Hamilton said to me that night, her voice dripping with champagne and cruelty, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. She said it loud enough for the whole table to hear, loud enough to make sure everyone knew exactly where I belonged, below them, beneath them, forever. I sat there in that glittering restaurant, my hands folded in my lap, the same hands that had scrubbed her family's linens for years, and I said nothing. I just smiled. Because that's what women like me do, isn't it? We smile. We stay quiet. We let people like her win. But here's the thing about silence. It doesn't last forever. And here's the thing about stains. Sometimes they don't come out because they were never really there to begin with. That night, my son stood up. My Liam. The boy who once wouldn't even call me Mom. He stood up in front of all those polished, perfumed people, and he did something I never thought I'd see, something I never asked for, something that changed everything. He made them hear what I'd been too quiet to say my whole life. One slap, one sharp, righteous sound that cut through decades of their arrogance like a knife through silk. And in that moment, Vivian Hamilton's perfect mask shattered. The room went dead silent. No more clinking glasses, no more polite laughter, just the echo of truth, finally finding its voice. You want to know how a laundry woman like me brought down an entire family of elites? How I turned their champagne smiles into scandalized whispers? How I made them beg for mercy they never showed me? Let me tell you, it didn't start with revenge. It started with soap, silence, and a life spent cleaning other people's dirt. But by the end, they learned what clean really means. I've spent my whole life in Riverfield, Connecticut, a town where wealth wears pearls and cruelty wears politeness, where people smile at charity galas and stab you in the back before dessert. It's the kind of place that worships appearances, where your worth is measured by your address, your last name, your ability to pretend you've never had to scrub a floor. I run May's Laundry and Dry. Have for 30 years. It's a small shop, coin machines humming day and night, the smell of detergent and steam thick in the air. To most people in this town, that smell is beneath them. To me, it's dignity. Every shirt I press, every stain I lift, that's me proving something. That hard work matters, that invisible hands keep this world turning, but they don't see it that way. To them, I'm just the laundry woman, a ghost in an apron, convenient when they need their silk blouses cleaned, invisible when they're deciding who gets a seat at their table. I thought I'd made peace with that. I thought I'd learned to live small, stay grateful, keep my head down. After all, I've been knocked down before, divorced after years of a barren marriage, humiliated by a husband who left me for someone younger, someone fertile, someone worthy. I thought I was done, finished, faded into the background hum of washing machines and loneliness. But then Ethan found me, a construction foreman with rough hands and a soft heart. He didn't care that I couldn't give him children. He gave me his son instead, a wounded, angry boy named Liam who hated me on sight. And somehow, through years of silence and small kindnesses, I became his mother, not by blood, by choice, by showing up, by loving him even when he slammed doors in my face. When Ethan died, he left me one thing, a letter hidden behind a vent, words I didn't find until years later, words that would change everything. This woman is the light of our family. That letter became my weapon. And my son? He became my voice. So when Vivian Hamilton looked down her nose at me and called me a stain that wouldn't wash out, when she tried to erase me in front of everyone, I didn't flinch, because I knew something she didn't. The dirtiest people in the room weren't the ones who did the washing. They were the ones who pretended their hands were clean. The first time I met Liam, he looked at me like I was something that had crawled out from under his bed. He was 12 years old, all sharp elbows and sharper eyes. His mother had left when he was 6, just walked out one morning and never came back. And now, here I was, this stranger in an apron, standing in his kitchen, trying to smile like I belonged there. I didn't belong there. We both knew it. Ethan introduced us on a Saturday morning. The smell of coffee and bacon filled the house, warm and hopeful. Ethan's hand was on my shoulder, gentle and proud, as he said softly, "Liam, this is May. She's going to be part of our family now." Liam stared at me, silent, his jaw tight, his fists clenched at his sides. Then he turned and walked upstairs. The slam of his bedroom door shook the picture frames on the wall. Ethan winced. I touched his arm and said quietly, trying to sound braver than I felt, "It's okay. He needs time." But time didn't soften him. It hardened him. For months, Liam treated me like a ghost. He'd walk past me in the hallway without a word. If I made dinner, he'd push the plate away and leave the table. If I asked about his day, he'd shrug and disappear into his room. The door would slam. Always that door. That sound became the rhythm of our home. Anger, distance, rejection. I told myself it didn't hurt, that I understood, that he was just a boy who'd been abandoned once and wasn't about to risk it again. But it did hurt. God, it hurt. Some nights I'd sit alone at the kitchen table after everyone was asleep, my hands wrapped around a cold cup of tea, and I'd wonder if love could ever be earned, if a heart locked tight could ever be opened, if I was foolish to keep trying. Ethan would find me there sometimes. He'd sit down across from me, his rough hands folded on the table, and he'd say gently, almost whispering, "He'll come around, May. He's just scared." I'd nod, smile, pretend I believed him. But inside, I felt like I was drowning. Then one afternoon, everything changed. The school called. Liam had gotten into a fight, a bad one. Another boy had shoved him during gym class, called him a name, something cruel about his mother leaving. Liam had punched him. Hard. Twice. The other boy's nose bled all over the gymnasium floor. When I got to the principal's office, Liam was sitting in a chair, his knuckles scraped and swollen, his face pale and defiant. The principal, a thin woman with wire-rimmed glasses and a mouth like a paper cut, looked at me with cold, measured disapproval. She said curtly, barely hiding her disdain, "Mrs. Doherty, your son has a violence problem. This isn't the first incident. We're considering suspension." The other mothers were there too, clustered in the hallway, whispering behind their hands. I could feel their eyes on me, judging, dismissing, deciding I wasn't enough, that Liam was broken, that we were both hopeless. Something inside me snapped. I stood up, walked over to Liam, put my hand on his shoulder. He flinched, but I didn't move. I looked that principal straight in the eye and said firmly, my voice steady and sure, "He's my son. If he's wrong, we'll fix it, together." The room went quiet. Liam's head turned, slowly. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and wet, like he couldn't believe what he'd just heard. I squeezed his shoulder. "Let's go home," I said softly, just for him. We walked out of that office together, past the whispering mothers, past the judgment, past all of it. That night, after dinner, after the silence that had filled our home for so long, I was washing dishes at the sink. The water was warm, the soap slick between my fingers. I heard footsteps behind me, soft, hesitant. Liam stood in the doorway, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, his voice barely a whisper, shaking and raw. He said, "Mom," just that. One word. I turned around, soap dripping from my hands. My throat tightened. Tears blurred my vision. He said it again, louder this time, like he was testing the sound. "Mom." I crossed the kitchen and pulled him into my arms. He was all sharp bones and trembling breath, and he clung to me like a child who'd been lost for years. "I'm here," I whispered into his hair, my voice breaking. "I'm not going anywhere." That one word, "Mom," washed away 20 years of loneliness in an instant. From that day on, Liam was mine, and I was his. but the world outside our kitchen, the world that judged us, dismissed us, decided we weren't good enough, that world hadn't changed at all. And it wouldn't, until years later when my son stood up in a room full of people who thought they were better than us and made them listen. Ethan died on a Tuesday. It was a fall day, the kind where the air smells like dying leaves and distant rain. He'd left for work that morning the same way he always did. Kissed my forehead, grabbed his thermos, told me he'd be home by 6. His work boots left muddy prints on the kitchen floor. I remember being annoyed about that. Isn't that terrible? The last thing I thought about my husband was annoyance over dirt. He never made it home. A beam collapsed at the construction site. They said he didn't suffer. They said it was quick. They said a lot of things that were supposed to make me feel better, but all I felt was empty, hollowed out, like someone had reached inside and scooped out everything warm and left only cold air. His last words to me, those kiss on the forehead words that morning, echoed in my head for months. But there were other words too, words I didn't find until much later, words that would save me when I needed saving most. The funeral was small. Ethan didn't have much family, just me and Liam and a handful of men from the construction crew, their faces weathered and sad, standing in the rain with their hats in their hands. Liam stood beside me at the graveside, 17 years old and silent as stone. His jaw was clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. When they lowered the casket, his hand found mine. He squeezed so hard it hurt. I squeezed back. After the funeral, people came to the house with casseroles and sympathy. They filled our kitchen with foil-covered dishes and empty condolences. They said things like, "He's in a better place now and time heals all wounds." And I nodded and smiled and wanted to scream. When they finally left, the house felt too quiet, too big. The smell of soap from the laundry downstairs mixed with the scent of lilies from the funeral arrangements, and I thought I might be sick. Liam went to his room. I heard the door close. Not a slam this time, just a soft, defeated click. I stood in the kitchen, alone. Again. Like I'd always been alone, even when I wasn't. I thought about my first husband, about being left, about infertility and shame and all the ways a woman can be told she's not enough. I thought about how Ethan had found me in that wreckage and made me feel whole again. And now he was gone too. The laundry became my refuge. I worked 12-hour days, sometimes longer. The rhythm of the machines, the hum and spin and click, kept me from thinking too much, kept me from falling apart. Soap and steam and other people's stains. That was my life now. That was all I had left. Liam graduated high school, got a scholarship to study architecture. He was brilliant. Everyone said so. His teachers, his professors, even the men from Ethan's crew who'd stop by sometimes to check on us. They'd say proudly, like uncles, "That boy's going places, May." Ethan would be so proud, and he would have been. God, he would have been. Liam worked hard, harder than anyone I'd ever seen. He studied late into the night, his desk lamp glowing under his bedroom door. He worked summer jobs, saved every penny, bought his own books. He never asked me for anything, never complained, just kept moving forward like stopping would mean falling apart. I understood that. I did the same thing. Years passed. The laundry stayed busy. Liam became an architect, the kind people shook hands with at charity events, the kind whose designs appeared in glossy magazines. He moved into a nice apartment downtown, wore expensive suits, drove a car that didn't sound like it was dying every time you turned the key. He visited every Sunday. We'd have coffee at the kitchen table, the same table where he'd once refused to eat my food. Now he'd sit across from me and tell me about his projects, his clients, his life that was so different from mine, it felt like a foreign country. I was proud of him. So proud it hurt sometimes. But I also felt the distance growing. Not in love, never in love, but in worlds. He belonged somewhere I didn't. Somewhere polished and bright and clean in ways I'd never be. Then one Sunday, he came over with someone. Her name was Claire Hamilton. She was beautiful, the kind of beautiful that comes from good genes and expensive salons and a life without laundry soap under your fingernails. She wore pearls, real ones, I could tell. She shook my hand delicately, like I might be fragile, and said sweetly with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, "It's so lovely to meet you, Mrs. Doherty. Liam has told me so much about you." I smiled back, made coffee, served cookies I'd baked that morning, watched the way Liam looked at her, like she was something precious he was afraid to break. I knew that look. I'd seen it before. It was hope, and hope, I'd learned, could be the most dangerous thing. Claire was polite, gracious. She complimented the cookies, admired the house, asked questions about the laundry business with the kind of careful interest that meant she'd never step foot inside one. When they left, Liam kissed my cheek and whispered warmly, his voice full of something I couldn't name, "I think she's the one, Mom." I stood in the doorway and waved as they drove away. Claire's hand rested on Liam's arm. She laughed at something he said. She looked perfect. And all I could think was, people who look that perfect usually have something to hide. I just didn't know yet how right I was, or how much it would cost us both to find out. The invitation came 3 weeks later. Liam brought it by on a Sunday afternoon, his face bright with that kind of nervous excitement you see in people who are trying to convince themselves everything will be fine. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, expensive. The kind of paper that whispers money before you even open it. He placed it on my kitchen table like it was something fragile, something sacred. I wiped my hands on my apron. They were still damp from washing dishes, and picked it up. The letterhead read, Hamilton Foundation, in elegant gold script. An invitation to a charity gala at the Riverfield Art Gallery, black tie, champagne reception, silent auction benefiting local arts programs. Liam watched me read it, his hands shoved in his pockets, trying to look casual but failing. He said hopefully, his voice a little too bright, "Claire wants you to come, Mom. Her family's hosting it. It's a big deal for them." I looked up at him, saw the hope in his eyes, the way he needed this to work. I folded the invitation carefully and said quietly, keeping my voice steady, "Of course I'll come." His shoulders relaxed. He smiled, kissed my forehead. "Thank you," he whispered gratefully, like I'd just given him something precious. After he left, I stood in my kitchen and stared at that invitation for a long time. The washing machine hummed downstairs. The smell of detergent drifted up through the floorboards. I looked down at my hands, rough, red, marked by years of soap and steam. These hands didn't belong at a Hamilton Foundation gala, but I'd go anyway, because that's what mothers do. The night of the gala, I wore my best dress, a simple navy blue thing I'd bought 10 years ago for a funeral. It was clean, pressed, appropriate. I looked in the mirror and saw exactly what I was, a woman who worked with her hands, trying to fit into a world that didn't want her. Liam picked me up. He looked handsome in his tuxedo, polished and confident, like he'd been born to wear expensive clothes. Claire sat in the passenger seat, all silk and pearls and perfectly styled hair. She turned and smiled at me sweetly, but with a hint of assessment in her eyes, and said, "You look lovely, Mrs. Doherty." I nodded, said nothing. The smell of her perfume filled the car, something floral and expensive and foreign. The Riverfield Art Gallery was all glass and light, perched on a hill overlooking the water. Cars lined the circular drive, Mercedes, BMWs, Teslas that cost more than I made in 5 years. Men in tuxedos and women in gowns that shimmered like water stepped out onto red carpet, laughing, air-kissing, belonging. I felt like an imposter. Inside, the gallery was stunning. White walls, spotless floors, art I didn't understand hanging in perfect frames. Crystal chandeliers dripped light. Waiters circulated with trays of champagne in glasses so thin they looked like they might shatter if you breathed on them. People clustered in small groups, their voices low and cultured, their laughter controlled and appropriate. They all looked the same, groomed, glossy, carefully constructed, like dolls in a very expensive shop window. Claire took Liam's arm and guided us through the crowd. She introduced him to people, Gallery donors, foundation board members, her parents' friends. They shook his hand, complimented his work, asked about his latest project. Some of them glanced at me briefly, their smiles polite but distant, before turning back to Liam. I was invisible. Again. The way I'd always been. Then we reached the center of the room where a woman stood holding court like a queen among subjects. Vivian Hamilton. She was tall, elegant, draped in a gown that probably cost more than my car. Her hair was silver white, perfectly coiffed. Diamond earrings caught the light. She held a champagne flute like a scepter. When she saw us approaching, her smile tightened. Just a fraction. Just enough. Claire said brightly with forced cheerfulness, "Mother, you remember Liam." And this is his mother, May Doherty. Vivian's eyes swept over me, top to bottom, taking inventory. Her smile never wavered, but something cold flickered behind it. She extended her hand limply, barely touching mine, and said smoothly with honeyed condescension, "How lovely to meet you, Mrs. Doherty. Claire has mentioned you run a small business?" The pause before business was deliberate, surgical. I smiled. "A laundry," I said simply, meeting her gaze. "How practical," Vivian said, her tone dripping with polite dismissal. She sipped her champagne. "We all need clean clothes, don't we?" The women around her tittered softly, a sound like breaking glass. Liam's jaw tightened. I felt him tense beside me. Vivian turned to him, her smile warming immediately, genuinely delighted now. "Liam, darling, Claire tells us you're designing the new waterfront pavilion. How exciting! You must tell us all about it." And just like that, I ceased to exist. The conversation flowed around me. Architecture, contracts, timelines, foundation support. Vivian's voice was warm and engaged when she spoke to Liam, cool and distant when her eyes accidentally brushed past me. I stood there in my 10-year-old funeral dress, holding a champagne glass I hadn't tasted, surrounded by people who looked through me like I was air. After a while, I excused myself. No one noticed. I found the restroom, all marble and gold fixtures and mirrors that were too bright, too honest. I looked at my reflection, saw my mother's tired eyes staring back. When I came out, I overheard voices around the corner. Vivian's voice, sharp now, without the honey. She said coldly, with barely concealed disgust, "Absolutely not. I won't have our table at the engagement dinner smelling like detergent and desperation." Another voice, a man's, probably her husband, murmured something I couldn't hear. Vivian laughed. It was a cruel sound. "Darling, there are standards. Our family has a reputation. We can't have the help seated with the guests." The help. I stood there in the hallway, my heart pounding, my hands clenched so tight my nails cut into my palms. For a moment, just one bright, burning moment, I wanted to march around that corner and tell Vivian Hamilton exactly what I thought of her standards, her reputation, her family, but I didn't. I walked back to the gallery floor, found Liam, smiled, told him I wasn't feeling well, that I'd take a cab home. He looked worried. "Mom, are you okay?" I touched his cheek gently, keeping my voice light. "Just tired, sweetheart." "You stay. Enjoy yourself." I left before he could argue. Outside, the night air was cold and clean. It smelled like salt water and freedom. I stood on the steps and breathed it in, trying to wash the scent of expensive perfume and casual cruelty out of my lungs. A cab pulled up. I got in, gave him my address. As we drove away, I looked back at the gallery, all that light and glass and beauty hiding something rotten underneath. And I thought, maybe it's time the world saw what really needs cleaning. But I didn't know how, not yet. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Vivian Hamilton's voice echoing in my head. "We can't have the help seated with the guests." The words circled like vultures, picking at something raw inside me. Around 3 a.m, I gave up, pulled on my robe and went downstairs to the laundry. The machines were silent for once. No hum, no spin, just the smell of soap and fabric softener hanging in the still air. I decided to clean. When you can't control your thoughts, you control what you can touch. I started with the storage closet at the back, a narrow space I hadn't properly sorted through in years. Boxes of old receipts, broken hangers, bottles of detergent I'd stopped using, the kind of clutter that accumulates when you're too busy surviving to organize. I pulled everything out. Dust coated my hands, cobwebs caught in my hair. The smell of old cardboard and forgotten things filled my lungs. That's when I saw it. Behind a stack of boxes tucked against the wall near the floor vent was an envelope. Yellow with age, thick. The seal broken, but the contents still inside. My heart stopped. I recognized Ethan's handwriting immediately. My name, May, written in his careful, blocky letters across the front. My hands shook as I pulled it free. Dust fell away like years shedding their skin. I sat down right there on the concrete floor, my back against the washing machine, and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded once. The creases worn, like someone had opened and closed it many times before sealing it away. I unfolded it slowly. The date at the top was 2 days before he died. My vision blurred. I blinked hard. Read, "My dearest May, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm sorry for that. Sorry I won't be there to tell you this myself, face to face, the way you deserve. But I need you to know something. Something I should have said more. Something I should have shouted from rooftops, but only whispered in quiet moments. You are the light of our family. Not the lamp that flickers. Not the bulb that dims. The real light. The kind that doesn't burn out. When I met you, I was a man with a broken boy and broken hope. You came into our lives and you didn't fix us. You showed us we weren't as broken as we thought. You loved Liam when he wouldn't let anyone close. You stayed when staying was hard. You made our house a home. People will judge you. They already do. They see your work and think it defines you. They see your hands and think they know your heart. They're fools. I've worked construction my whole life. I know what real strength looks like. It's not in the men who lift beams. It's in the women who lift spirits. It's in you. Don't let anyone, not family, not strangers, not even Liam on his worst days, make you forget what you are. You are worthy. You are enough. You are everything. If the world ever tries to tell you different, pull out this letter. Read it. Remember. I love you, May Doherty. I loved you the day I met you. I loved you every day after, and wherever I am now, I still do. Yours always, Ethan. I don't know how long I sat there. Time stopped. The world stopped. Everything stopped except the sound of my breathing and the words on that page. Tears ran down my face. Hot. Silent. Years of them. All at once. I pressed the letter to my chest and sobbed. Not the quiet kind. The kind that shakes your whole body. The kind that comes from a place so deep you didn't know it existed until it breaks open. Ethan had known. He'd known I would need this. Known that someday someone would make me feel small. Known that I would question everything. My worth. My place. My right to exist in spaces that didn't want me. And he'd left me proof. Written proof. That I mattered. When I finally stopped crying, I sat there in the stillness, holding that letter like a lifeline. The concrete floor was cold beneath me. The smell of old paper and soap filled my nose. Somewhere outside, the first birds began to sing, the sound of dawn approaching. I read the letter again and again and again. By the 5th time, something shifted inside me. The hurt didn't disappear, but it changed shape, became something harder, something sharper. Vivian Hamilton thought she could erase me with a few dismissive words, thought she could decide my value based on what I did for a living, thought she had the right to keep me away from my own son's engagement dinner. She was wrong. I stood up slowly, my knees stiff from sitting on the floor, folded the letter carefully, placed it in the pocket of my robe, right over my heart. That morning, when Liam came by for our usual Sunday coffee, I was already dressed, already waiting. He took one look at my face and said cautiously, sensing something different, "Mom, are you okay?" I poured him coffee, sat down across from him, pulled out the letter and slid it across the table. His eyes widened. "What is this?" "Read it," I said quietly, my voice steady and sure. He did. I watched his face change, confusion, recognition, pain, love, grief, all of it washing over him in waves. When he finished, his hands were shaking. Tears streaked his cheeks. He looked up at me, his voice breaking with emotion. "Mom, Your father knew," I said gently, reaching across to cover his hand with mine. He knew what I'd face, what we'd face, and he wanted us to remember. Liam stared at the letter, at his father's words, at the truth written in ink that wouldn't fade. Then he said something that changed everything. He said fiercely, his voice low and determined, "I'm not hiding you anymore. Not from Claire, not from her family, not from anyone." I squeezed his hand. "Liam." "No," he said, his jaw set, his eyes harder than I'd ever seen them. "There's an engagement dinner next week. Claire's family is hosting. They want it private, just close family. Her mother specifically said you weren't invited." My stomach dropped. He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw Ethan. I saw strength. I saw love. "You're coming," he said with absolute certainty, his voice ringing with conviction. "And if they don't like it, they can answer to me." I opened my mouth to argue, to tell him it wasn't worth the fight, to protect him the way I'd always protected him. But then I thought of Ethan's words. "You are the light of our family," and I thought of Vivian's words. "We can't have the help seated with the guests." Something inside me hardened, crystallized, became unbreakable. "Okay," I said softly, meeting my son's eyes. "I'll come." He nodded, reached across the table, held my hand. Neither of us knew what would happen at that dinner, but we both knew something would. And when it did, the world would finally see what clean really meant. The restaurant was called Le Ciel, the sky. How fitting. A place so high above everyone else, so removed from the ground where real people lived and worked and bled. It sat on the top floor of Riverfield's oldest hotel, all windows and white tablecloths and waiters who moved like ghosts, the kind of place where the prices weren't printed on the menu, because if you had to ask, you didn't belong. Liam picked me up at 6. He wore a dark suit, crisp and perfect. His jaw was set, determined. I could see Ethan in him, that same quiet strength that didn't need to shout to be heard. I wore the same navy dress from the gala. I'd pressed it carefully that morning, my hands steady on the iron. Ethan's letter was folded in my purse. I touched it before we left, just to remember. In the car, Liam reached over and squeezed my hand firmly, his voice low and reassuring. "Whatever happens tonight, we're in this together." I nodded, couldn't speak. My throat was too tight. The elevator to the restaurant was mirrored on all sides. I watched our reflection rise. A son and his mother, heading toward a battle neither of us had asked for, but both of us were ready to fight. The doors opened to soft piano music and the smell of expensive wine. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables set with silver and china, so delicate it looked like it would shatter if you breathed wrong. A hostess in a black dress greeted us with a practiced smile that faltered slightly when she saw me. She recovered quickly, professionally. "Mr. Doherty, this way, please." She led us through the dining room. Eyes followed us. Whispers rippled like water. I kept my head up, my shoulders back, my hands steady at my sides. The Hamilton table was in the corner, private, elevated slightly on a platform so everyone could see them, so they could see everyone. Vivian Hamilton sat at the head like a queen on a throne, her husband, Richard, beside her. Silver-haired, sharp-eyed, the kind of man who'd built empires and crushed competition without blinking. Claire sat across from them, beautiful and nervous, her fingers fidgeting with her water glass. When Vivian saw us approaching, saw me, her smile froze. Just for a second, just long enough for me to see the crack in her mask. Then she recovered, smiled wider, stood gracefully and extended her hand toward Liam, her voice dripping with forced warmth. "Liam, darling, so wonderful to see you." She ignored me completely. Liam didn't let go of my hand. He said evenly, his tone calm but unmistakably firm, "Mrs. Hamilton, you remember my mother?" Vivian's eyes flicked to me, cold, calculating. Her smile tightened. "Of course," she said icily, each word carefully measured. "How unexpected." Richard stood, ever the politician. He shook my hand briefly, his grip limp and dismissive. "Mrs. Doherty, please sit." We did. Liam pulled out my chair. I sat down carefully, feeling the weight of every eye in the room on me. The chair was too soft, the table too wide. Everything felt wrong, like I was a puzzle piece forced into the wrong spot. Claire reached across and touched my hand tentatively, her smile uncertain. "I'm glad you could come, May." Before I could respond, Vivian cut in smoothly, her voice like honey laced with venom. "Yes, well, family is family, isn't it? Even when it's complicated." The word complicated hung in the air like smoke. A waiter appeared, took orders, poured wine into glasses that caught the light like liquid gold. I didn't touch mine. My hands stayed folded in my lap, hidden under the table where they couldn't betray me. Conversation flowed around me. Business, foundation matters, Claire's upcoming exhibition, Liam's pavilion project. They talked like I wasn't there, like I was furniture, decoration, something to be tolerated but not acknowledged. I stayed quiet, listened, watched. Vivian dominated the table, her voice bright and commanding, directing conversation like a conductor. She laughed at Richard's jokes, complimented Claire's dress, asked Liam probing questions about timelines and budgets and connections. Then she turned to me. Her eyes were sharp, predatory. She sipped her wine delicately and said with saccharine curiosity, "So, May, tell us, how is the laundry business these days? Still thriving?" The way she said thriving made it sound like a disease. I met her gaze, kept my voice steady and simple. "It keeps me busy." "I'm sure it does," Vivian said, her smile widening with cruel delight. "Manual labor is so honest, so refreshingly simple. No pretense, no complications, just soap and water and elbow grease." Claire shifted uncomfortably. "Mother." Vivian waved her hand dismissively, her tone suddenly sharp and cutting. "Oh, don't be sensitive, darling. I'm simply saying there's nobility in hard work. Some people are meant to work with their hands. Others are meant to work with their minds. It's just the natural order of things." Liam's jaw clenched. I felt him tense beside me. I touched his leg under the table. A warning. Not yet. Richard cleared his throat awkwardly, trying to smooth things over. "Vivian, perhaps—" "I'm just being honest," Vivian said sweetly, turning her predatory gaze back to me. "May understands, don't you, dear? You've built a life for yourself, a good, simple life. There's nothing wrong with knowing your place." The table went silent. Knowing your place. The words echoed, bounced, settled like stones in my stomach. I looked down at my hands, the same hands that had scrubbed floors and washed dishes and pressed shirts and held my son when he cried. The same hands Ethan had held and called strong. I looked up, met Vivian's eyes, and I smiled. Before I could speak, the waiter arrived with appetizers, tiny portions on huge plates, food arranged like art, the kind of meal that cost more than I made in a week and wouldn't fill a child. We ate in silence, the tension thick enough to choke on. Then Vivian raised her glass. The crystal caught the light, throwing rainbows across the white tablecloth. She said grandly, performing for the room, a toast to family, to love, to the beautiful union of two people from complementary worlds. Complementary, not equal, complementary. Everyone raised their glasses, even me, even Liam. Vivian's eyes locked on mine. Her smile was venomous, triumphant. And then she said it. She said clearly, loudly, deliberately, because let's be honest, some stains never wash out. A laundry woman will always smell like laundry, no matter how hard she scrubs. The room froze. Every head turned toward our table. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the piano player's fingers stuttered on the keys. I felt the blood drain from my face, felt the humiliation wash over me like ice water, felt every eye in that restaurant burning into my skin. Claire gasped softly. "Mother, that's—" Richard looked horrified. "Vivian, for God's sake." But Vivian just smiled, sipped her wine, waited for me to crumble. I looked down at my lap, at my hands, at the napkin I'd been gripping so hard my knuckles were white. Then I felt it. Liam's hand, on my arm, shaking, not with fear, with rage. I looked up at him. His face was pale, his eyes dark, his breathing shallow and fast. I saw something break inside him, some final restraint, some last thread of civility snapping like old rope. I whispered urgently, trying to pull him back. "Liam, let it go. It's fine." But it wasn't fine, and he wasn't letting it go. He stood up, slowly, deliberately, and the entire restaurant held its breath. Time slowed. Liam stood beside me, his chair scraping against the floor with a sound that cut through the silence like a knife. Every eye in the restaurant turned toward us. The piano had stopped. Conversations had died. Even the waiters froze mid-step, trays balanced in their hands. I reached for him, my hand trembling. "Liam, please, don't—" But he wasn't listening. He was looking at Vivian Hamilton with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger. Something deeper. Something colder. Something that had been building for years and had finally found its moment. He said quietly, his voice low and deadly calm, "Mrs. Hamilton, you want to talk about stains?" Vivian's smile faltered. Just a fraction. She recovered quickly, lifting her chin with practiced arrogance. "Liam, I don't know what you want to talk about what washes out and what doesn't?" His voice grew louder, sharper, cutting through her words like glass. "Let's talk about it." Richard half rose from his seat, his voice urgent and warning. "Son, I think you should—" "I'm not your son," Liam said coldly, his eyes never leaving Vivian, "and I'm not interested in your opinion." The room gasped, collective, shocked, delighted. You could feel it. The hunger for scandal, for drama, for something real in a world of polished pretense. Claire reached for him desperately, her voice pleading. "Liam, please, let's just—" He pulled his arm away, gentle but firm. "No, Claire. Not this time." He turned back to Vivian. She sat there, frozen, her champagne glass suspended halfway to her lips. Her smile was gone now, replaced by something harder, something defensive. Liam's voice rang out, clear and strong, filling every corner of that restaurant. "This woman," he pointed at me, his hand steady, his voice cracking with emotion, "this woman raised me, not because she had to, not because I was hers by blood, but because she chose to." I felt tears prick my eyes. I shook my head. "Liam, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do," he said fiercely, looking down at me briefly before turning back to Vivian. I was 12 years old, angry, broken. My real mother had abandoned me. And this woman, this laundry woman, she showed up and she stayed, even when I slammed doors, even when I refused to speak to her, even when I told her I hated her. His voice broke. He swallowed hard, continued. "She worked 60-hour weeks to put food on our table. She sat up with me when I had nightmares. She defended me when teachers called me violent. She believed in me when no one else did. She made me into the man I am today." The restaurant was silent, absolutely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Liam reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a folded piece of paper, Ethan's letter, the one I'd found behind the washing machine. He held it up so everyone could see. "My father wrote this 2 days before he died," he said, his voice thick with tears and pride. He wrote it because he knew that people like you. He looked directly at Vivian, would try to make her feel small, would try to erase her, would try to convince the world she didn't matter. He unfolded the letter carefully. His hands shook. He cleared his throat, and then he read. His voice carried through that restaurant like a bell, clear, strong, unbreakable. You are the light of our family. Not the lamp that flickers, not the bulb that dims, the real light, the kind that doesn't burn out. Tears streamed down my face. I didn't try to hide them. Liam continued reading. You are worthy. You are enough. You are everything. Don't let anyone, not family, not strangers, make you forget what you are. He looked up, looked at Vivian, his eyes blazing. My father was right, he said, his voice trembling with righteous fury. She is the light. And you... He stepped closer to Vivian. You're just the dirt we're finally ready to wash away. Vivian's face drained of color. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. And then Liam did something I never expected, something I never asked for, something that changed everything. He raised his hand, and he struck her, one clean, sharp slap across the face. The sound echoed, rang, reverberated through that silent room like a thunderclap. Vivian's head snapped to the side. Her perfect hair fell across her face. Her champagne glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor, sending liquid and crystal across the white tablecloth. The entire restaurant erupted, gasps, shouts, chairs scraping, people standing, phones appearing, cameras flashing. But Liam didn't move. He stood there, his hands still raised, his chest heaving, his eyes locked on Vivian. She touched her cheek slowly, disbelieving. Her fingers came away and there was nothing there. No blood, no mark, but the humiliation was written across her face like a brand. Richard jumped up, his voice booming with outrage. How dare you? I'll have you arrested, You'll do nothing, Liam said coldly, turning to face him. His voice was ice. Because if you try, I'll make sure everyone knows what your wife really is. What your family really stands for. I'll expose every dirty secret, every backroom deal, every person you've stepped on to get where you are. Richard's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Nothing came out. Claire was crying, silent tears running down her perfect face. She looked at Liam like she'd never seen him before, like he was a stranger. Maybe he was. Liam turned to me. His face softened. The rage melted away, replaced by something tender, something pure. He knelt beside my chair, took my hands in his. I'm sorry, Mom, he said softly, his voice breaking with love and regret. I'm sorry I didn't do this sooner. I'm sorry I ever let them make you feel like you were less, like you were anything other than everything. I cupped his face. My hands, rough, red, marked by years of soap and steam, held his face like it was the most precious thing in the world. Your hand speaks for me now, I whispered, my voice thick with tears and pride and love. He pressed his forehead to mine. We stayed like that, in the middle of that chaos, in the middle of that scandal. Two people who'd found each other in the wreckage and refused to let go. Behind us, Vivian Hamilton sat frozen, her perfect mask shattered, her reputation crumbling, her power stripped away by one righteous slap and the truth it represented. The restaurant buzzed around us, phones out, videos recording, the scandal of the decade unfolding in real time. But I didn't care, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible. For the first time in my life, someone had stood up and said, "This woman matters." For the first time in my life, I felt clean. Liam stood, helped me to my feet. We walked out of that restaurant together, past the staring faces, past the cameras, past the ruins of the Hamilton family's perfect facade. Outside, the night air was cold and sharp. It smelled like salt water and freedom. We stood on the sidewalk, silent, breathing. And then I started laughing. Not the polite kind, the real kind. The kind that comes from deep in your chest and refuses to be contained. Liam looked at me, startled. Then he started laughing too. We stood there under the streetlights, laughing until we cried, until our sides hurt, until we couldn't breathe. Because sometimes, just sometimes, the world gives you exactly what you need: justice, truth, and one clean sound that changes everything. The video went viral by morning. Someone at the restaurant had recorded the whole thing: Vivian's cruel words, Liam's defense, the slap, all of it. By sunrise, it was everywhere. Social media, news websites, local television. The headline read, "Architect defends mother against elite socialite's insult." I didn't watch it, didn't need to. I'd lived it. But the world watched, and the world had opinions. Some called Liam a hero, others called him violent. The comment sections exploded with debates about class, dignity, respect, justice. People I'd never met had suddenly decided they knew everything about my life, my worth, my story. I stopped reading after the first hour, because here's what I learned that morning. Sitting in my kitchen with a cup of coffee and the smell of soap drifting up from the laundry below. Other people's opinions don't clean anything. They just make noise. The Hamilton family fell apart faster than I expected. Within days, the foundation donors started pulling out. Turns out nobody wants to associate with the woman caught on camera calling someone a stain that won't wash out. Board members resigned. Charity events were canceled. The Hamilton name, once spoken with reverence, became a punchline. Vivian tried to apologize. Publicly. A carefully worded statement released through lawyers, full of phrases like misunderstood and taken out of context, and deeply regret any offense caused. But the internet is unforgiving, and the truth, once released, doesn't go back in the bottle. Richard Hamilton stepped down from his position at the foundation, quietly, without fanfare, the kind of exit reserved for people who know they've lost. And Claire? Claire called Liam 3 days after the dinner. I heard his side of the conversation from the kitchen. His voice was calm, sad, final. He said gently but firmly, without anger, "I loved you, Claire. I really did. But you stood there and let your mother humiliate the woman who raised me. You chose silence. And I can't build a life with someone who stays silent when it matters." There was a long pause. I heard her voice through the phone, high, desperate, pleading. Liam said quietly, with finality, "I hope you find someone who fits your world better than I do." Goodbye, Claire. He hung up, came into the kitchen, sat down across from me. We didn't say anything, just drank our coffee. Let the silence speak. After a while, he said softly, almost to himself, "I thought I wanted that life." The gallery openings, the foundation dinners, the right address, the right people. I reached across and covered his hand with mine. He looked up at me, his eyes wet. But none of it meant anything without you there. None of it felt real. I smiled, squeezed his hand. Real doesn't wear pearls, sweetheart. Real wears calluses. He laughed. It was a tired sound, but genuine. The weeks that followed were strange, quiet, peaceful in a way I hadn't felt in years. The laundry stayed busy. People still needed their clothes cleaned, scandal or no scandal. But something had changed. When customers came in now, they looked at me differently, not with pity, not with condescension, with something closer to respect. A few even apologized for years of small slights I hadn't realized they remembered, for dismissive comments, for treating me like furniture. I accepted their apologies, kindly, because holding grudges is like carrying dirty laundry. Eventually, you have to set it down or it breaks your back. Liam came by every Sunday, just like always. We'd sit at the kitchen table, drink coffee, talk about his work. He'd designed a community center for the East Side, affordable, accessible, beautiful. The kind of building that would serve people like us. When he told me about it, his eyes lit up. That old spark I remembered from when he was young, before the world told him who he should be. One Sunday afternoon, about 2 months after the dinner, we were sitting in the kitchen. The washing machine hummed softly in the background, that familiar sound that had been the soundtrack of my life for 30 years. Liam was quiet, thoughtful. He stared into his coffee cup like he was reading tea leaves. Finally, he said slowly, carefully choosing his words, "Mom, do you ever regret it?" That night, what I did? I looked at him, really looked at him. Saw the boy who'd once slammed doors, saw the man who'd defended me when the world tried to erase me, saw all of it, the pain, the growth, the love. I said softly but firmly, my voice steady with certainty, "Regret? No, sweetheart. That night you gave me something I'd been waiting my whole life for." "What's that?" he asked gently, his voice barely above a whisper. "A voice," I said simply, my eyes meeting his. "You gave me a voice." He nodded slowly, swallowed hard, reached across and took my hand. We sat there in silence. The washing machine hummed. The afternoon light slanted through the kitchen window, warming the old wooden table Ethan had built decades ago. And for the first time in my life, that sound, the hum of the washing machine, didn't remind me of work, didn't remind me of being invisible, dismissed, tolerated. It reminded me of something else, peace. Because I'd learned something important that night at Le Ciel, something Vivian Hamilton and people like her would never understand. Dignity isn't given. It can't be bestowed by the right family name or the right address or the right table at the right restaurant. Dignity is earned by showing up, by staying, by loving people even when it's hard, by working with your hands and your heart and refusing to be ashamed of either. And sometimes, just sometimes, dignity is defended by someone who loves you enough to stand up and say, "This woman matters." I thought about Ethan's letter, still folded carefully in my dresser drawer. His words, "You are the light of our family." He'd been right. Not because I was perfect, not because I'd done everything correctly, but because I'd shown up every single day. In the face of rejection and dismissal and cruelty, I'd shown up. And in the end, that was enough. Liam stood up to leave, kissed my forehead the way Ethan used to. He said warmly, his voice full of love and gratitude, "Same time next week, Mom?" I smiled. Wouldn't miss it for the world. He walked to the door, paused, turned back. "Mom?" he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "Yes, sweetheart." He smiled, that beautiful, genuine smile that reminded me why I'd stayed all those years ago when staying was hard. "Thank you," he said simply, his words carrying the weight of everything unspoken. "For what?" I asked gently, though I already knew. "For not washing out," he said, his voice breaking just a little. "For being the kind of stain that doesn't come clean because it was never dirty to begin with." He left before I could respond, before I could tell him that he'd saved me just as much as I'd saved him. I stood in the doorway and watched him drive away. The evening air smelled like salt water and laundry detergent and possibility. Behind me, the washing machine beeped, a cycle complete. I went downstairs, opened the machine, pulled out a load of clean sheets, white, soft, smelling like fresh air and new beginnings. I folded them slowly, carefully, let the warmth seep into my hands, and I thought, this is what clean really means. Not the absence of dirt, but the presence of truth. Not perfection, but honesty. Not silence, but the courage to speak. The Hamiltons had learned that lesson the hard way. Their perfect facade had crumbled under the weight of their own cruelty. Their spotless reputation had been stained by the very thing they'd tried to hide, their contempt for people they considered beneath them. But me? I'd learned something different. I'd learned that one righteous slap could echo louder than decades of polite whispers. I'd learned that love, real love, doesn't stay silent when it matters. I'd learned that my hands, rough, red, marked by years of honest work, were more beautiful than any diamond ring could ever be. Because these hands had raised a good man. These hands had held on when letting go would have been easier. These hands had cleaned the world's dirt and refused to be ashamed. I finished folding the sheets, carried them upstairs. The house was quiet now. Just me and the hum of the machines and the soft sound of my own breathing. I made myself a cup of tea, sat down at the kitchen table, watched the sun set through the window, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Somewhere in Riverfield, Vivian Hamilton was probably sitting in her mansion, surrounded by her perfect things, wondering how it all fell apart so quickly. And somewhere else, my son was driving home, his heart lighter than it had been in years. As for me, I was exactly where I'd always been, in my kitchen, in my home, doing what I'd always done, showing up. And that, I'd finally learned, was more than enough. The washing machine hummed softly below, a sound I'd heard 10,000 times before. But tonight, for the first time in 30 years, it sounded like music. Like forgiveness, like peace. Because that night, with one clean sound, my son had washed away decades of silence, and the world, finally, was clean.